All right, let's talk about fermenters. This is important because you get to choose what level of equipment you want to buy as you get into the hobby, right? And so we're going to talk about everything from a cheap plastic bucket that absolutely gets the job done, all the way to stainless steel, and I'm going to tell you the pros and cons, but this is probably the most expensive component or tool to buy in the home brewing hobby. And there are definitely some pros and cons to each version, and let's get to it. So we're going to start off with what most people start out with, and that is the plastic bucket. This particular one from More Beer has a spigot built in. Some do not. You just have to use an auto siphon or some kind of siphon to get the beer out. It is absolutely good enough to make craft beer. The primary limitations that these guys have are that you can't really do oxygen-free transfers. There are things that you can do to limit that, but I'm gonna get into O2 or oxygen-free transfers when we talk about the stainless steel stuff. So essentially, there's nothing to this. You don't even need the spigot. It makes bottling very easy. So these are absolutely good tools to use. So the anatomy of it, there's really nothing to it. So we're just gonna move on to the next one. But right now, this is the bung that goes into the hole that is drilled into the lid right here. And you put that guy in. Once your yeast is in the beer, it's gonna start producing CO2 and alcohol. And so to keep nasties, bugs, whatever out, we're gonna put some sanitizer or vodka or whatever into the airlock, pop that guy in the bung, and now it's gonna fill that with CO2 and start bubbling, and so that's how you know that the yeast is doing its thing. So, by the way, that's gotta be like one of the best parts of home brewing, is seeing that airlock activity, because you wake up the next day, you're like, is it working, is it working? And sure enough, once you see it, you're like, yes, my project worked. And so, just thought I'd throw that in there. So that's the plastic bucket. One note, a lot of these kits that you're gonna get, they're gonna talk in the instructions about moving from primary to secondary fermenter. I don't do that. A lot of the home brewers that I hang out with, we've all kind of gone through it. Brewlosophy has done episodes about it. It's simply an outdated step, in my opinion. If you wanna do it, do you, boo. But that means you're gonna transfer from one bucket into a second bucket or a second vessel to get it off of the tube at the bottom. So there's gonna be, you know, the spent yeast or hop residue or other stuff that falls out after it's done fermenting. So the idea is to let it clarify in a second bucket off of that tube. It makes no quality difference in the final beer that I have found. So when you see that in the instructions, you have my permission to completely skip that step. Don't transfer from primary to secondary, because in my opinion, it introduces the chance for infection, oxidation, or just a gnat to land in it, whatever. Just take that variable away. I want to drink as fast as I can anyway, so I don't let beer sit in fermenters for 4 months. That's a very old school way of doing things when, say, their yeast wasn't as good as it is now. So I think that was an important thing to mention. So that being said, the solution that I found early on was switching from buckets to the catalyst. So the catalyst fermenter came out right after I started home brewing, and it kind of solved that problem of having to transfer to secondary, and I'll tell you why. So basically, I'll give you the anatomy. Here we have, this one has temperature control, so that's a stainless steel coil that I can run glycol through. When I first bought it, it just had a lid with a hole for the bung. It did not have cooling temperature control. So the option here that I have, this one does. So what that means essentially is to make sure that that beer stays at the perfect degree temperature, so say 68 degrees. Glycol chilled in the glycol chiller is gonna run through this, which is immersed in your wort that's turning into beer, and it'll drop the temperature. And then there's a heating pad on the back. And with your ink bird, essentially, oops, I'm dripping here. With your Inkbird, it's gonna tell either the glycol chiller to turn on if the temperature gets too warm, or it's gonna tell the heating pad to turn on if it gets too cool. So that temperature probe is gonna sit down inside of this. So that's the temperature control option, which was a game changer for me because I got to get rid of the refrigerator that I was using as temperature control. But we're gonna get into that in the temperature control video next. So this fermenter is PET. You can actually, it was advertised where you can take all the stuff off, take the top rack out of your dishwasher, put the whole thing in the dishwasher and let it rip. I thought that was pretty awesome. I never did that because I didn't want to hear about it from my wife. So I just scrubby brush and sanitize with PBW, or clean with PBW and then sanitize with Star Sand before using it. So this, I've added the sample port, and this is the key right here. So inside here is a butterfly valve. And so this butterfly valve can close and open, but essentially what you do as you're fermenting is you take a mason jar. So you could even get like a bigger mason jar and you screw it onto here. And this lets you do a couple of things. As it ferments and it finishes fermenting, you get to see the trube collecting at the bottom, and you can actually use this to collect your yeast as well. So my typical workflow would be the regular pint-sized mason jar down on the bottom, close the valve, unscrew the mason jar, dump that, and then put this guy on so that the next stuff that's settling out, that's cleaner yeast. I can actually take that mason jar, sanitize the lid, close it, put it back in my refrigerator, and say I'm doing a brew day within a couple of days. I felt confident that I was gonna do kind of the same style. Put this on, rack my wort into this, and then open the port, and now I don't need another pitch of yeast because I'm just gonna reuse that same yeast. So a lot of home brewers want to reuse yeast. This gave me the ability to do that. The one downside of this process is, say I was just dumping the trube and putting the jar back on, opening it back up to collect the next round of trube, is that then you've got bubbles of oxygen that are gonna flow through your wort, and that is oxidizing your beer. So say you're doing New England IPA or something like that that's really sensitive to that, it's gonna oxidize the crap out of it. So I would try to mitigate that by purging with CO2, like basically I'd hold it right under and open up my CO2 bottle with an open line and just like dumping CO2 into it until I'm confident that it's flushed as much oxygen out as possible, sealing that up, and then I could more confidently open it and do that. So that's the mason jar portion. So you get to dump trube. So that is the, I guess, part of the reason you would do a secondary fermenter, so moving from one fermenter to the next. But it gives you the ability to do it just on that. So we've covered the temperature control option. We have the mason jar. Next is bottling day. So once you've cleaned all of that stuff out, nothing else is settling into the bottom, so you basically have clear beer down at the bottom, you can close this like it is now and then put this little guy on there, and this attaches to your hose with the bottling cane on the other end. So now you open it back up, obviously sanitizing everything. Open it back up, and now directly from the fermenter, you get to go into the bottles without having to worry about the auto siphon or all of those extra pieces. So this is extremely useful. I loved this fermenter for many, many years, and still use it when I'm making cider or wine or things where the temperature control isn't as finicky, I suppose. So that's why I keep it, and I absolutely still love the catalyst. The only reason I moved away from the catalyst, and this is where the big ticket stuff comes in, is when you move into stainless steel. So I'm gonna put this away and I'm gonna show you the big guns. The home brewing top of the line gear is stainless steel fermenters. There are multiple companies that make these. I just chose the Spike Brewing Flex Plus here. I also have a BrewBuilt X1 Uni by More Beer. Both are fantastic. There are other companies that make them. There's some that have less features, some that have more. And this gives you the ability to brew and ferment beer exactly like craft beer is made in breweries. There's no exception to that. So the Flex Plus is fantastic because you have temperature control here. So this is where the probe goes in a thermo well. I have a glycol chiller down inside this. Actually, I'm gonna show you that. Everything is tri-clamp, which is super easy, and you can kind of build it however you want. So this is what the chiller looks like, and she needs to get a good soak because I've got some buildup going on here. I have quick connects on my glycol lines, which makes everything a breeze on brew day. You can pressurize this up to 15 PSI, I believe, which means that you could also carbonate inside this if you wanted to use a spunding valve. You can attach a sample port to this. You could attach a sight glass for transfer. You can put an inline filter off of the tri-clamp. It is absolutely every single piece that a formal brewery would have, except a bottom dump port. So that basically just takes your price tag up by like, I don't know, $200 more above this model. So these are wonderful. The casters help you move it around so you're not having to like lug around big buckets full of beer. They get heavy and messy. So stainless steel is kind of the landing place for anybody that's taking this hobby very seriously. I did, and I will never go back to not fermenting in an oxygen-free environment. Essentially what that means is I can connect CO2 to the top to pressurize this and push beer out into a purged keg. And we're gonna talk about how to do that when we talk about kegs. But if the environment inside the keg is oxygen-free and I'm replacing the headspace here with CO2, the beer never comes into contact with oxygen until it comes out of the taps. So that will give it the longest shelf life. You avoid the risk of oxidation and contamination as well. So you give that beer every single chance possible to be exactly what you want it to taste like, and that's why I stick with these. So now we've talked about the plastic bucket, the catalyst, and stainless steel fermenters. There are other versions out there. Some folks ferment in kegs, meaning that they can, basically do like a 4-gallon batch, because if you did 5 full gallons, there isn't enough room for that Kreuzen up top. There are glass carboys, which were very common, I guess for the decade leading up until like probably 2005 or 6 when we started seeing other materials coming out. I personally have used glass, and it was just, I know myself, and I don't trust myself when there's alcohol and glass involved. I fortunately never shattered a full fermenter, but I did shatter a empty one. So I won't go back to glass. That's pretty much it on your options. The bucket is gonna be like 15 bucks on More Beer, all the way up to stainless steel. And I wanna say after all the attachments and everything, you're looking at about $800. You can go up in size. So my BrewBuilt is for 10-gallon batches, that holds 14 gallons. And it's just how much you wanna get into that hobby. But I stair-stepped. By stair-stepping, I ended up spending a lot more money than had I done all my homework up front, realized, hey, I'm really gonna go in deep to this hobby and love it. I probably would have just saved up my money and gone straight to stainless, or found somebody that was selling theirs and got it cheaper. Because by stair-stepping, I ended up spending a lot more money in the long run. So, but there you have it. I hope that all makes sense to you. These are extremely important in the brewing process and cannot be overlooked. So I hope that was informative and guides your decision on what to get.